In this week's Parsha Vayeishev, we have the very interesting and intriguing story about Yehuda and Tamar. We're told that when Tamar sent a message to her father-in-law Yehuda, who at that time was a very prominent figure, he was the head of the Beis Din, and for him to own up to having caused Tamar to fall pregnant from him would have been a very embarrassing thing to do. Yet, however, Yehuda said Sod Kamimeni, and the Medrash says that because of that, because he was able to own up and say a very embarrassing statement that it's all as a result of my doing, he was therefore Zocher, and he merited to have kings coming from his descendants. There's another very interesting Medrash which says that Leah, the mother of Yehuda, merited that her children were people who gave thanks because she was someone who took hold of that midah, of that trait of Haidah, of giving thanks. And when was that? It was in fact when she called her son Yehuda, his name Yehuda. The Torah tells us that she said, Hapa'am Odes Hashem. Now I am going to thank Hashem, and she called his name Yehuda. Now, Rabbi Pinchas Roberts of London, Hendon Adas, asked the following question. When she called her son Yehuda, what was she doing it for? She did it in order that for the rest of his life, whenever she would call his name, she would remember to thank Hashem. This was an act that she did in order to remind herself of the graciousness of Hashem and to continually thank for the good things that she was on the receiving end of. If we think about it, that was an act of giving thanks. What Yehuda did was an act of owning up and acknowledging the fact that he had been perhaps guilty in a certain act. These two things don't seem to equate with one another. And why was it that because she thanked, she merited to have a child like Yehuda who owned up? And he says there is a common factor between these two things. Yes, one of them is Haidah, giving thanks. The other one is Haidah, owning up. But there's something between the two. There's a common factor which leads to someone being able to thank and to own up. And that, he says, is getting rid of what we call the ego. Leah could have said, it's my righteous deeds, and therefore I was able to merit to more sons than any of the other wives of Yaakov Avinu. It was because perhaps she wasn't as loved as the others. She could have thought of all different reasons for why she merited to have this great present of having more Shvatim, more children than any of the other of the wives. However, she didn't. She simply looked at the fact that it was the graciousness of Hashem and that she was lucky to be on the receiving end, and therefore she continuously thanked. She didn't see herself as playing a role at all in the fact that she was on the receiving end of goodness from Hashem. If you think about Yehuda, when he was presented with the dilemma, should he own up? He's the Av Beis Din, he's the most prominent figure in town. This would cause him great embarrassment. But if he owns up, he's done the right thing. So what would stop him owning up? Imagine someone is about to be defamed, something is about to be found out about a very prominent figure. They will go to all lengths to try and stop the matter being revealed because it's going to damage their reputation. Their ego prevents them from allowing the matter to come to light. Yehuda, however, was different. Yehuda said this is the right thing to do, and he did not have an ego. He merited, he actually inherited from his mother to have this ability to ignore the ego and allow himself to own up. Perhaps this is therefore the two things that equate being Haidah, giving thanks, and being able to own up. It's to be looking at the greater picture without the I being involved. And as the Baal Shem Tov once said, there's a pasuk in Vayeishev which says, Moshe Rabbeinu said, "Va'anochi omei ben Hashem v'nechem." I will be standing between Hashem and between you. And the Baal Shem Tov said you can read that in a way of drush and say, Va'anochi, the I, omei ben Hashem v'nechem, is what stands between the human being and Hashem. One's ego sometimes is that which acts as a barrier between us and Hashem, between us and the truth. And perhaps with Chanukah arriving this very coming Shabbos, which is a time of Haidah, of giving thanks, of giving recognition to Hashem, it's a perfect time to think about this and realize that the Anochi, the I, has to be gotten rid of, and we've got to look at the greater picture and realize everything we are on the receiving end of is benevolence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we have to be grateful for that.